Chapter 1. You and the Afterlife. My Near-Death Experience. At the age of 9, I actually drowned. I couldn't swim. My older cousin and I took a boat out to the middle of the lake. We were goofing around and somehow I fell into the water. I recall swallowing water, sinking into the ground, and then dying. Instead of trying to save me, my cousin went back to the shore to get help. My aunt was absolutely terrified and called a lifeguard. I must have been under the water for 15 minutes. I'm not sure how that's physically possible, but I survived. During, quote, death, I noticed how I still had awareness. I could see and hear. But who was seeing and hearing? I remember that question mystifying me. Who was seeing and hearing? I was not underwater. My awareness was somehow hovering above the water. And it was at the beach, with my aunt and cousin, and at home all at the same time. The simultaneous nature of my perception was baffling. Here, at the age of 9, I learned that my body is not required for seeing and hearing. Then things became foggy, and I found myself back in the boat, coughing and spitting up water as the lifeguards performed first aid. So what happens after death? Here's an excerpt from Chapter 3 of my book Lives of the Soul. When we die, we're sometimes taken by surprise that we're actually still alive. The more immature or brainwashed the person was during life, the longer and the grander the surprise. Most souls recuperate quickly, and the fog of amnesia starts to lift. They remember their life as a soul, which is actually their main life. They remember that their stay on the planet was actually only a side life, a temporary experiment, one of many lives. A soul is born and dies many, many times in the course of its development and exploration. Consciousness can be seen as 3 concentric circles. The smallest circle represents your mind, your daily focus, your ego. The second circle, which contains the first, is a kind of subconscious or sub-awareness in which all memories and experiences of this and other lives are stored. The third circle, which contains both of the others, some call superconsciousness or higher self. This higher self is your true identity, which also contains all of your sub-identities of all lives and the ego selves of all incarnations. Higher self is the soul itself and represents the center of our wisdom and a viewpoint beyond life and death. After death, most people experience themselves floating above their physical body, observing it from outside and still existing. Since the incarnated earth ego is conditioned to feel death as something sad and shocking, the soul can often observe how those relatives and friends who were left behind are in grief. For this reason, it sometimes attempts to console or positively influence those left behind. Some souls are frustrated over the fact that they cannot touch or communicate with family members and friends. Yes, a soul is able to feel frustration. The reason it is difficult to contact the bereaved and tell them, "I still exist, all is well," is because of an energy frequency mismatch. Their grief is on a different frequency than the soul's relative elation. Elation cannot communicate with grief. If the bereaved could just relax a little and remain aware, they'd be able to sense the presence of the soul right there in the room with them. If you ever experience the death of a person, then try it out. Rather than succumbing to grief and sorrow, you can keep that for later. Try to become aware of the soul still hovering in the room or space above. You can sense its presence by a tingle on your skin or an air draft in the room in which the windows are closed. If you're very aware, you might hear the soul's communication, which often manifests as feelings or voices that were not created by your imagination. And in an even more aware and relaxed state, you can see them as a ball or a fog of light. A typical place to experience such phenomena is a hospital. This is why a large percentage of belief in afterlife and accounts of ghost sightings come from nurses and doctors. Another way to view afterlife realms to some degree is by staying somewhat aware in a state of half sleep. It's the state between sleeping and waking that benefits so-called astral vision. Children are more likely to notice the presence in a hospital room because they are, in those moments, not preoccupied with worry. From my book, Lives of the Soul. Reports of near-death experiences go back thousands of years. Because they all sound similar across the globe, it's safe to assume that, like birth, death follows predictable patterns and sequences. I've had a near-death experience myself, as well as numerous out-of-body experiences, so the idea of life after death is no stretch for me. To me, there's no such thing as death of a person. I get bored at graveyards because I don't think there's anyone lying there. Sure, I'll visit a funeral to pay respects to the deceased person and send them my well wishes for ascension to a better place, but all this grief and pain over someone's death is comical to me. The only reason to grieve would be perhaps when a person does not ascend to a pretty place and gets stuck in various astral planes instead. So, while a proper burial ritual is important to help a soul release and to put the body at rest, there's a Chinese legend that says unburied bodies may become zombies. One's well wishes after that should go upwards to the sky rather than downwards to the grave. Something gleaned from reports of near-death experiences that is not commonly known is that you don't feel any pain at death. The idea of death being painful is false. Why? Because when you die, you're no longer in body. It's the body that feels pain, not you. As you die, you see that you are not the body. You're not in body. You have nothing to do with the body. Many report seeing their body from the outside, looking as if it belonged to some stranger. Whether you die by car accident or gunshot, you do not feel the impact because the energy unit that you are leaves the body before that, without exception. The only way to feel the impact is when it's not deadly. To lead the good life, it's not really that helpful to be preoccupied with afterlife, other realms, and such. That can become a distraction from leading a full life, here and today. However, having some basic knowledge of other realms lessens the fear of such and allows you to align your life in such a way as to ascend when you die. A near-death experience can also be had shortly before death, so that the person dying has the time to tell everyone listening what is happening while they are dying. There are numerous accounts of this in near-death experience literature. One personal experience is of a relative who was in the hospital and dying. We sensed the 94-year-old woman was dying, but only knew it for sure when she pointed to the upper corner of the room and said there was a warm, gleaming light coming from there. We looked up, but none of us could see anything. By the expression on her face, we knew that she was experiencing something different than we were. In the many weeks we had visited her prior, she usually had a calm and sometimes somber expression, whereas now she looked cheerful and radiant. Her eyes were wide open as she told us of how beautiful it all is. "They're waiting for me," she said. "Who's waiting for you?" her daughter asked. She named several relatives who had died before. "It's so peaceful and warm here. I want to stay," she said, as if she were already there. What was particularly interesting to me was that she saw and named a person she was not supposed to recognize because that person had died at birth. It was her not-born daughter. How could she recognize her if she had never seen her? My view, that I've already stated in Lives of the Soul, is that there are soul families who often know each other over many lifetimes and places in the universe. That's how she could recognize someone whose face she had never seen on Earth. She died in those minutes in the hospital, but none of the people present seemed to be too sad about it, having seen her enthusiastic expression as she closed her eyes and breathed her last breath. What a nice way to die, I thought, discarding the notion that all death somehow has to be difficult and painful. Indeed, dying is not as terrible as the movie industry makes it out to be. You usually feel lighter because you have discarded the body like one would discard heavy baggage. Near-death experiences report that they felt more alive than ever before, a sense of tranquility and love unlike anything experienced on Earth, etc. These are good indicators that we are not merely dealing with a fantasy or a dream, as some doctors think. Hospital doctors are among the groups of people who encounter the most NDE cases. A mere fantasy is not even 1/10 as intense as the ecstatic, floating, spiraling, buzzing sensations I myself have had on the other side. What I've found amusing is the lack of any special identification with or relationship to the body. This is most remarkable, as one has gone around with the body an entire lifetime, and then, instead of feeling a strong bond to it, it's seen as some uninteresting object lying there. The people who report near-death experiences before dying oftentimes do not come back. They tell their tale, and then they die. Those who are pronounced clinically dead and then do come back usually tell a more elaborate story of what happened. A majority of them, around 60%, tell of going through a tunnel toward a bright light, where they are met by deceased relatives or other welcoming figures. I don't understand the nature of this tunnel because I've never consciously experienced it in this life, but I would assume that it's symbolic of transitioning to another dimension of reality. Where do people go then after they die?